Today on Better Book Clubs, Nicole Krauss's The History of Love. Today, in my series of my top 10 favorite books of all time, I want to talk about Nicole Krauss's novel, The History of Love. I'm not doing these videos in any particular order because it's hard to rank these 10 books, but I know these 10 books are really pretty much my favorite books that I've ever read. And Nicole Krauss's The History of Love is a book that I hadn't heard of. I picked this copy up in the airport in Seattle. I had a long flight home to the East Coast, and I think I read the whole thing in one sitting, and just was really taken by it. But I didn't really deeply appreciate it until I decided a couple of years ago that I was going to teach it in my college writing class, and got a chance to reread it and rethink about it and fall in love with it all over again. So today I want to share with you some of the things that I really love about The History of Love and encourage you to read it too. The History of Love was actually a New York Times bestseller after it was published in 2005. But again, a lot of people don't really know the title today when I mention it as one of my favorite books. It's the story of a girl named Alma Singer and her brother Bird, who is kind of trying to search for his identity, and her widowed mother, who never really has recovered from Alma's father's death. And connecting them all together, aside from the fact that they're family, connecting them with some of the other characters in the book is a book called The History of Love. So one of the things that's challenging about The History of Love is that a book within a book idea, and also just the complexity of the layers that Krauss has built up here. So you might actually find yourself having to take a few notes as the story develops and gets more complicated, and you start to realize that there's a mystery involved. And keeping track of relationships and kind of brainstorming possibilities as you go is one way in which I think to enjoy the book even more, because you're paying attention to those things. And it's hard to keep track of it all if you're not stepping back to jot down a couple notes in the margin from time to time. One of the challenges of reading A History of Love is that there are several different narrators. There's Alma herself, and she doesn't come in until chapter 2. So the first chapter is another narrator. His name is Leo Gursky, and he's kind of a cranky old man. And that, I think, makes the book feel a little bit unapproachable at first, but just kind of embrace Leo as a character and know that he's not going to tell the whole story. And by the end of the story, you're going to love him, I think, as much as you love all of the other characters, or be compelled by his story as much as you're compelled by the others. So that's one of the challenges of reading The History of Love, is recognizing that you have multiple narrators that you're working with and being willing to shift gears as the chapters shift. One of the things I really love about the book is that by the end I was invested in all of the characters and the outcome for all of the characters. I was partly invested because there's a puzzle, a mystery involved, and I was trying to put all the pieces together. So I had to do a little bit of work as a reader, but the payoff that Krauss gives us makes that work well worth it. And the other thing I love about this book is just that it's beautifully written. It's a beautifully written kind of meditation on all kinds of love, not just romantic love, but also the love within a family relationships, the love of friendship, and even the love that you can express for a stranger who you come to care about. I also love that Krauss does this without making it overly sentimental. So I thought I'd read a really brief passage for you just to give you a flavor for The History of Love. And this comes from the middle of the book. And it's about the author of the book within the book, whose name is by Litvinov. If Litvinov coughed more and more as the years passed, a hacking cough that shook his whole body, causing him to bend over double and made it necessary for him to excuse himself from dinner tables, refuse phone calls, and turn down the occasional invitation to speak, it wasn't so much because he was ill as that there was something he wished to say. The more time passed, the more he longed to say it, and the more impossible saying it became. Sometimes he woke in a panic from his dreams. "Rosa," he'd shout. But before the words were out of his mouth, he'd feel her hand on his chest and the sound of her voice. "What is it? What's wrong, sweetheart?" And he'd lose his courage, overcome with fear of the consequences. And so instead of saying what he wanted to say, he said, "It's nothing, just a bad dream," and waited for her to fall back asleep before pushing off the covers and stepping out to the balcony. When he was young, Litvinov had a friend, not his best friend, but a good one. The last time he saw this friend was the day he left Poland. The friend was standing on a street corner. They'd already parted ways, but both turned back to see the other go. For a long time they stood there. His friend's cap was gathered in a fist held to his chest. He raised his hand, saluted Litvinov, and smiled. Then he pulled his cap down over his eyes, turned, and disappeared empty-handed into the crowd. Not a day went by now that Litvinov did not think about that moment or that friend. The History of Love is not a perfect book, but it's pretty close to perfect as far as my taste is concerned. So I hope you'll give The History of Love by Nicole Krauss a read, and maybe even consider it as a great reading for your book club.